Sorry, co-host.
I think you mean vice host.
Hey, if you want to be, I'll happily take the host position. I think the first thing we have to say is that Reddit went a little bit mad last time.
Oh my god. That was both the most follow-up and almost like feedback, and also the quickest it's ever happened as well. It's mad. It's just...
So we're basically going to ignore most of it. That's what we decided to do. There's far too much to go through here. But there was quite a lot of good stuff on spinner design and spinner materials, which I think is worth taking another look at. Because I kind of made some assumptions on things, and I think you kind of made some assumptions on things that we've been given a bit more info on. The worst assumption I made was Tombstone's bar being Hardox, just because that's what I'm used to in Robot Wars.
Yeah, it's S7 tool steel, whatever that is.
It's a steel used in the making of tools.
This is just a podcast of assumptions. Yeah, so it's an hardened S7 tool steel, apparently. And then he's also got an aluminium bar with tool steel teeth that's some fancy alloy of aluminium.
So that would be the one that in the first fight against Sub-Zero got damaged. Because I think he hit the wall and one of the teeth got chipped or something like that, which meant it wasn't as sharp as it should have been. Maybe it's a little bit imbalanced as well. He ended up not using it again in the competition, which is a shame because it's his longest and therefore carries the most energy.
Yeah.
The other big area of feedback was our discussion about aluminium.
Yeah, so it was Yeti has an aluminium drum, which we both thought was an interesting material choice because it's a very lightweight metal. And I think we both had the assumption that when you're building some kind of kinetic energy weapon, you want a lot of weight in that weapon. And I think our conclusion was that aluminium was used by that team just because it's easiest to machine. But we have, on authority of Gary of PP3D fame, that aluminium is also reasonably good choice because you can get you get a much bigger diameter spinner and get a much higher tip speed as a result of that, which could deliver bigger blows.
It was interesting that comment came up because it was something that I just saw incidentally and sort of learned about between us recording and putting the show out. So I'd already sort of gone out and realised that we were wrong on that. And then we got the feedback anyway. So I was sort of sat there going, oh, I really wish I could have brought this up and sounded clever. Now it's someone else getting the credit.
You were shut down by Gary.
Yeah, to be fair, when it's Gary Kearns from PP3D, you're happy to be told you're wrong, you know? The final issue that came up was money, and specifically prize money and sort of builder stipends or stipends. I don't know how that's pronounced. I've only ever seen it written down.
I don't even know what that word means.
Just being given money for stuff. That just sounds like commerce, doesn't it?
A fixed regular sum paid as a salary or expenses to a clergyman, teacher or public official. I mean,
yeah, let's go with that.
I'm not sure that applies to Robot Wars or Battlebots.
It's the word I've seen used. But no, it was claimed by someone commenting that builders in America were getting something like, I can't remember the exact figure, I should have the comment in front of me, but I don't because I'm not a professional. I think the figure quoted was something like 20,000 for building and competing. That seems a little fanciful to me.
Yeah, $20,000 from the show to build and maintain their robot.
But what you do have in Battlebots is actual prize money. So the winner is getting $25,000. Second place is getting $10,000. There's kind of a scale down from there, down to teams that sort of get into the qualifiers getting about $500. The other thing you have got is $10,000 prizes for design. So there's a couple of categories for that. Again, I haven't got them in front of me. And there's also the main prize is the giant nut, and they do a giant bolt as well for the most destructive robot. And that's also, I believe, a $10,000 prize. So there is quite a lot of money in it if you're very good.
Can you win more than one of those? Did Tombstone get both of those, the most damage and also the winning?
I don't think so, but last series, or season as I should maybe say for Battlebots, he did come second and get the most damage award.
Fair enough.
So he would have been getting, assuming the prize structure was the same, almost as much as the winners did.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I had this all open as a PDF and then decided to take a screenshot of a tiny bit of it, so I can't actually access all the information.
This comes up occasionally. I don't know how often this ends up in the edit, but the way you use technology baffles me.
I don't like having multiple tabs of things. It messes with my brain, it overwhelms me, and I can't be doing with it. It reminds me too much of doing essays.
When Ryan sends me feedback on the edit that I do, he sends me a screenshot of a document open in, open office. Like a screenshot of a Word document is just ridiculous.
It started off as me trying to be quick. Now it does help that it annoys you slightly.
It doesn't annoy me, it's just weird.
It makes you uncomfortable, doesn't it?
I mean, it's a misuse of technology. It makes you seem much older than you are. That's the kind of thing my grandparents might do. That's up there with printing memes. That's what that is.
I would argue that an older person wouldn't realise that was an option. I think it's a very creative approach to the problem, and we all know that I rate that highly.
I look forward to getting one of those, like you've got the expanding brain meme, right? You got like the little brain, the big brain, the world brain, and the galaxy. I'm looking forward to like you printing that off to me and sending it to me in the post.
Series 10 ratings.
Oh,
If this episode were a meme. Oh dear. I suppose we should get onto some robots. We get to kind of start off where we left off last episode by talking about Bronco, which is, for me, the only properly effective flipper in Battlebots.
I'm not quite sure I agree with you, but okay.
Disagree, go ahead. That's what we're here for.
I can't think of one off the top of my head that's better, but I feel like there were other reasonably good ones, but Bronco is definitely the standout one among them.
It's the only robot I've seen really throw a competitor.
Yeah, okay then.
Apart from the vertical spinners, but that's very different. Bronco does that thing where they've decided that they know they're going to get wheels knocked off, so they'll just have as many as possible so they can keep running as long as possible. Which, to be fair, in Battlebots, it's like we see quite a lot. If you look at a robot like Stinger, they go for exactly the same philosophy.
Yeah.
It's quite a good way of doing your spinner-proofing in a sense. Just sort of ablative pieces, really.
Yeah, it worked really well for them fighting Minotaur.
Well, Minotaur's a bit of an exception, isn't it? Minotaur is amazing.
These guys also have there's not in any of the pictures, but they have these like sheets of metal that go around or over the wheels, but they never seem to use them. Like in like the pictures on the show, they've got these this skirt thing that hides the wheels a little bit, but they put them above the wheels. I think it might be fighting Beta or something with kind of an axe weapon, and then. If they even fought Beta, I can't remember now. Anyway, and then they sort of took them off. I don't think they even had those skirt things on when they were fighting Minotaur. It was weird.
The only hammer that Bronco fought was Blacksmith.
Yeah, that's the hammer that I was thinking of. They put these skirt things above the wheels.
Which, by the way, is an impossible fight to find on YouTube, which is very annoying for me. With Minotaur, which you've now got me pronouncing Minotaur when it's totally Minotaur, and I'm going to have to train myself out of it now. Thanks for that. Those little sort of side skirts, I wouldn't really call them skirts, that infers something like Panic Attack, but those little side bumpers, are they really going to do anything against Minotaur?
Well, they'd have slowed it down a little bit, I'm sure.
They'd have taken an eighth of a hit, and then they'd just be bent up and getting in the way. You're far better off going in without. I imagine it's allowed them to add a little bit more to their rear wedge, which was very effective this year. There's no point going in with armour that you know isn't going to be effective.
That is true.
One thing that I've heard about Bronco, and I can't really confirm it, but I've heard it in enough places to assume that it's true. Apparently they literally took 2 copies of Bronco to the tournament.
2 whole robots.
Supposedly, yeah. Now, I can't see anything in the rules that's against that. If you can do it, I suppose you do. But that seems like very slight overkill.
So you took like they took 2 assembled versions of this robot, or was it we've got enough spare parts to build this from scratch if we need to?
That's what I'm not sure about. I'm imagining at the very least they took an assembled spare chassis. Kind of like you see in Formula 1 where they'll have that sort of monocoque together without the engine in it, ready to go if they smash the other one up. So it may not be that they took 2 whole assembled robots. Let's face it, everyone's got spares of everything except their chassis usually, so in a sense it's not that different, but it feels very different.
I think the line for me would be if the difference between having it in parts and then having it fully assembled. If they just had 2 assembled Broncos, I don't know the rules, but it feels like that would be sort of against the spirit of them. If nothing else, it's sort of a bit weird to just have 2 fully assembled robots, and whereas like having them in parts, that feels a bit better. I feel like if you had 2 assembled robots, you could do like in Ultimate Frisbee, just have like 2 of them and be working on one or something while the others are fighting. It's just to swap them around, like an offense one and a defense one. Or but no, you just have one Bronco that's fighting, and while that's fighting, you could be repairing the other one, which I feel like would not be fair.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say about fully assembled. What do you even class as fully assembled?
Well, so if they had 2 robots, you could flip a coin and pick one and just send that into the fight with no work needed done on it. That's like a fully assembled robot. All you'd have to do is stick some batteries in it, and then it's good to go.
So you'd be happy for them to turn up with a second fully welded together chassis, for example?
I think so, because that sort of feels more like they at the very least they'd have to assemble the robot before they could use it. I don't know. It's a weird line, I guess.
It's tricky for me because, and this is a theme that's going to come up later on, I'd argue that's just an extension of the sort of modular build concept, in that you are just plugging things into that chassis in the same way that you're plugging a different weapon onto a robot.
Yeah.
It's a question of where that line is.
Yeah, I don't know. We'd need to go read the rules.
I had them open and shut them, remember?
You're a muppet.
Thank you.
Hey, you're welcome. When Bronco was fighting Razorback, that's when we first see Bronco coming backwards. They've got this big wedge thing on the back of their robot for fighting spinners.
Yes.
And this is the first fight, so they spun around and they approached Razorback backwards the whole way, which I think is a pretty cool tactic. It's weird. It's one of those things where I'm not entirely sold on starting the fight backwards. I can understand having the wedge on the back and then just spinning around. It's one of those funny little small lines, At what point, I don't know. I feel like you should always start a fight facing your opponent. But I guess with some robots, it's hard to know. Like if you've got like a full body spinner, what is facing your opponent?
This is one of those things that again comes back to the different judging criteria in Battlebots. If Bronco went into a fight and only backed into an opponent, and that fight went the distance, they would almost certainly lose a judge's decision.
Yeah.
Whereas if, for example, like in the Chromefly fight, which was before the Razorback fight, actually, they used the same tactic.
Oh, okay.
They managed to go in and immediately break Chromefly's hilariously weak bar,
But split
which
it
then
in two,
gave them license to come in and actually flip them.
Yeah. Well.
So it is a bit of a risk. If it doesn't outright win you the fight, you're putting yourself in danger.
Well, Bronco was always fine with it. They left Razorback on their side and then lost to Minotaur after Minotaur systematically removed every single one of their wheels.
That is what drum spinners are all about. That surgical precision. That's why I love watching them. And as much as I do like Bronco and I want to see Bronco go as far as possible, that was a great way for it to go out. Just on the floor, no wheels, firing the flipper and flailing about. It's a very pure defeat.
Yeah, that was a really good fight to watch.
I suppose we should also give a word to Blacksmith here. It's kind of lost next to Bronco, but a very interesting design.
Is it an interesting design?
Are you not a fan?
I don't think it's got any design flair, really. And I don't understand why you'd weaken your hammer by sticking a flamethrower in it.
Because it looks cool on TV.
Yeah, but then your hammerhead keeps falling off.
Admittedly, there are some design limitations that have been forced on them by other design choices. But in typical style, I'm going to like it anyway.
Oh, God. What is it with you and liking bad robots, man?
It's not an objectively bad robot. It's won a fight. I just love it's got that really boxy design, but with that big old wedge on the front. And an electric hammer, because I always like hammers. And what more do you really want?
Beta, that's what I'd want.
We can't all be beta. I also like it's quite an old school build in that it's just a box section frame with armour over the top. And we know this because we got a very good view of its insides.
Yes, we did. I don't know. I think it's an uninspired robot, personally. I do think they've compromised their axe or their hammer so much by putting that flamethrower through it. I mean, you can see the axe head falls off in at least one fight, if not both of them. And
it definitely does in the Minotaur fight. I honestly can't remember the Bronco fight.
It falls off in Bronco as well, yeah. I think they're hitting Bronco, and Bronco might even catch them with their flipper, but it definitely gets flying off, and then they're just sort of like wailing on Bronco with a tiny little stick at the end of that fight. It's a bit silly. And they didn't even have the flamethrower working in that fight, so it was just completely pointless. And then in Minotaur, they got the flamethrower working. But then Blacksmith caught fire because it's flammable.
Was it the fuel supply that went, or was it like a battery that went?
I think it was probably the fuel supply, to be honest.
Because I'd always assumed battery until you just mentioned it.
Yeah, it must. I mean, the most likely thing is the fuel supply. Whatever valve it is that's like letting fuel in or out must have just stuck open, and then it's just flaming.
I really want to look at that again now, just to see what sort of smoke it's giving off.
It looked more like a flamethrower fuel fire to me than a battery fire, but
Fair enough, because let's face it, a lipo fire is quite distinctive.
Yeah, they're more like
That thick white smoke.
Yeah, and they're more like a small explosion than a fire, or a very, very fast fire.
Well, I'm upset that you don't like blacksmith. I feel like you're not going to like the other two robots in this section either, though. That's the thing.
It's not a strong opening set of robots for us, I'm afraid.
I mean, Bronco was a good one to do.
Bronco's good.
Bronco's interesting.
Yeah, I like Bronco.
But we kind of know it already, you know? We've already got very intimate with Bronco so far. We've looked at all its insides. We know it inside out at this point.
Chromefly. Chromefly has got 2 bar spinners, and they both seem to be directly attached to a motor, and they also seem to be very prone to shattering.
2 spinners is directly equivalent to no spinners. Especially when, as you say, they are mounted directly onto the motors and appear to have all the weight of a newborn chicken. I mean...
They got a drone as well, I didn't even know that.
Oh yeah, they've also taken, 5 or 6 kilos of their weight allowance that could have gone into the weapon for a drone. It doesn't self-right.
Doesn't so far, and these spinners are at an angle, so when they're turning, they're putting a lot of strain on their directly attached to the motor's spinners as well.
Are they? As in, are they putting strain on it, really, by being at an angle?
Yeah, because so if they're completely flat, horizontal, and you spin about, there's no gyro effect on that. Whereas as soon as you have them anything off axis, the further off axis, it's like further off horizontal it's going to be, the more it's going to resist the turning you're doing, right? So even at a slight angle, if they start spinning quickly, they're gonna have some. It's going to be more stress than it would otherwise be.
That's fair. I think they were so puny and weak that it wouldn't actually have mattered. But I can understand why you think that would be an issue.
In this particular implementation, maybe not a problem, but definitely in other implementations, it is a problem.
It's just, what is the point of Chromefly?
I don't know. It's just, I don't know.
Knowing what other robots were reserves for this, I really hope they started as a reserve. So if they were chosen above basically anything, that's a bit of a shame.
There's another robot that has two spinners, and I think it's a bit more justified because it's rotationally symmetrical. We'll come on to it in another episode.
Yes.
And that's a more
Counter-Revolution, was it called?
something like that. And that's a more, it's not in this episode, but it's a more interesting sort of approach, like reason to have it. Whereas this is just sort of like it's two spinners with no advantages as a result of doing that, really. And you sort of like halving your potential energy for no real gain. I don't get it.
I mean, if we're gonna play devil's advocate and give a justification for that design, redundancy isn't necessarily a bad thing. You know, if you lose one weapon, you've still got another. The fact that they're both terrible, we won't bring into it for now. Also, if one weapon gets stopped by an opponent, you've got the other still spinning.
Yeah.
So there are potential advantages to having 2 weapons like that. But again, they're both so lightweight and so weak that it's basically 0. They were very lucky to make it through their qualifier as well, because they were against a far better opponent that just kind of stopped working. I'm baiting you, Sam. I'm baiting you.
They're against a robot that stopped working.
Tell us about Bucktooth Burl.
I mean, what is Bucktooth Burl, man? It's got a tiny little... What? I'm looking at the... It's either very cleverly painted or it's actually a wooden drum. I suspect it's very cleverly painted.
Is that a step up or a step down from a foam board drum?
I feel like wood would shatter in a slightly more interesting way than a foam board drum. I don't like Bucktooth Burl.
There are elements of it that I like. I like that it's really compact, because that does give them the opportunity of having very strong armour. I like the way they've manufactured the drum as a series of linked discs. Mm-hmm. I think, again, that's a smart way of doing it. If it's damaged, you can maybe swap one out. You know, you don't have to have a whole spare drum, but you could have maybe a spare section.
Yep.
It just seems a bit lacking on power, and it also seems to really lack grip in the arena.
Yeah, they've done that same kind of lots of discs rammed together for their tyres as well.
Yes, which seems to deteriorate quite quickly as the fight went on. You know, they sort of started fraying apart, and I think it started riding lower because of it, which may have been part of the problem with grip.
Yeah. I'm also looking at this picture, and they've got an exposed, like a properly exposed chain driving that drum as well.
Yes, I mean, it would take a good precision hit to get to it, but it's still a brave way of setting up.
Yeah, I mean, it's a precision hit, but it's a precision hit that someone will make if you're fighting for long enough.
Although they weren't fighting for long enough, so that was fine.
They got one fight, not shown in full, against Chromefly, and that was it.
I've watched the full version. There's a reason it wasn't shown in full. It was basically about 2 minutes of Bucktooth Burl trying to run into Chromefly and missing.
Oh, God.
And just sliding around. It spent more time going sideways than it did forwards or backwards.
Yeah. I mean, it was a full-length fight because it was a judge's decision to give it to Chromefly.
Was it?
Yeah.
Yes. I only watched it earlier as well. I should have remembered that. Presumably given on the basis that Bucktooth Burl's weapon stops after the first hit.
Yeah, I guess it must have just sort of kept... Vaguely remember there was sort of like... The judges had to review it quite closely to decide who did damage. I think it was one of those situations where so little damage was done. I think they sort of... No, I'll tell you what happened. So I'm pretty sure it's this one where Bucktooth Burl went into Chromefly and did some damage. And the judges, I think, initially gave it to, or on closer, they were going to give it to Bucktooth Burl. Then on closer inspection, they realised that Bucktooth's drum wasn't spinning, so it wasn't their weapon that did the damage. It was just just an impact from them. So which is why they gave it to Chromefly in the end. I think that was this fight. I'm pretty sure it was this fight.
I did not get any of the detail of that just watching the fight on its own on YouTube.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of thing that's just sort of when they're doing their recappy things in the broadcast. I think it's Sam that's just giving a fairly quick overview of what happened. She's just like running down the things that happened in those fights and stuff. So fairly sure that's what happened. I'm sure we'll hear about it if not.
So I spent 2 minutes of my life watching a robot miss another robot to get less information than you who watched a highlight as part of the main show.
Yes.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Should we move on to 4 significantly better robots?
3 significantly better robots. Yes, let's do it. First up, we have Razorback, the first of the first of many Swiss Army bots that I gather you really love. They're your favourite kinds, right?
This one I'm borderline okay with. We'll get to the one I really don't like. We'll store up for that one because that's gonna be fun for everyone.
So Razorback is an interesting sort of robot. It's got these two. So it's got these 4 wheels, and the whole centre of the robot can basically rotate around an axle in the middle of them. And they've got 2 weapons, a really big sort of grappling claw thingy, and they've also got some kind of drum spinner that they can put on there as well.
That's about all I could say about it, really. Apart from, why would you design your robot so that it can sit on its side?
Yeah, that is a rather unfortunate oversight.
I mean, they've probably spent quite a long time designing that thing.
Yep.
They probably spent quite a long time optimizing it.
Well,
It will have gone through CAD and all of that. And at no point did they go, make the side slightly curvy.
I bet what happens here. So I'm trying to think. If it's on its side and its weapon is in line with the like the floor axis, if you will, then it will stay on its side. But I bet if they could rotate the middle of their robot round, it would fall down slightly, and then they just bring it up again, and they'd end up on their wheels again. I think they got left on their side because they couldn't really move anymore.
Yeah, you'd imagine that with the grappler on,
Yeah.
the rotation of that would be able to get them free, but with the drum,
Yeah, it's just not quite enough.
yeah, it was one of those robots that didn't really capture my imagination in any meaningful way.
Yeah, the drum isn't enough to make it lean around like that.
You know, the drum it has is quite small as well, and it's not positioned that prominently on the robot.
No, not at all.
So yeah, it was all a bit, yeah. I was excited to get to it after those 2, and then remembered, hey, I don't really have an opinion on this.
Razorback would be much better if they didn't have a Swiss Army bot approach to it. I think if they just left it as the grappling thing, I think they could do much more interesting things with it. They had a fight against Sawblade in their qualifiers, and judges gave it to Razorback. It wasn't shown in full. And then they had a fight against Ghost Raptor, and Razorback just sort of pushed Ghost Raptor around a bunch and then won. And then they lost to Bronco at the end when they were just left on their side, unable to do anything, and then Bronco won. That is their
Uninspiring.
That is their story. A largely uninteresting robot. Sawblaze, possibly a more interesting robot.
It's a big Hardox dustpan, basically.
It's like a less refined Dead Metal. It's about as effective as Dead Metal, but looks way less cool.
It's an interesting one because it's a design that I wish worked better.
Yeah, I agree.
I like the idea of a deployable weapon. There's something visually about a weapon that you have to sort of activate to use, that sort of theatre of bringing it down on an opponent that you've trapped. I absolutely loved. But then they add the fire to it and all of that, and it all just starts to feel a little bit gimmicky.
Yeah, it becomes a bit American, really, doesn't it?
I'm also really interested by their saws. They've got 2 saw options.
Okay.
One's a sort of normal saw blade, as I would call it. The sort of thing you'd expect to see on like a table saw or something like that. Presumably the kind you would use on metal. And then they've got a blade that I swear is usually used for bricks. It's like a normal abrasive disc, but with little cutouts to make really broad teeth. And it seemed to work quite well. So I really want to know what kind of blade that was and why it was so effective.
They were using this against Razorback, weren't they? That was their only fight.
Yeah, that was their only fight. There was a qualifier as well. I think they were in a proper... Or were they? No, they weren't in a proper three-way qualifier.
Yeah,
or were they? Or were they? I'm going to have to check that out because I'm sure... The problem is there's a couple of robots like it that I get confused between.
What else is like this?
Scorpios. Yeah, that shut you up, didn't it?
Well, that's more because I can't remember what the hell that one is.
It looks a lot like saw blades.
Brilliant. Well, I don't want to take your word for that. I want to see it for myself.
Yes, it was in
anything like that?
qualifier with Road Rash.
What are you on about?
It's a similar weapon system.
I must be finding the wrong robots, man, because all the robots I'm finding look like actual scorpions.
They're very similar. Very similar. Get on the Battlebots wiki and tell me they're not similar.
No, it's spelled with a K. That's why. Okay, right. They are very similar.
Wasn't that obvious?
They are very similar.
Thank you.
I'll give you that. But I'll tell you what, if you Google Scorpius with a C instead of a K, those robots are properly cool.
I'm on it.
I'd love to see some of them.
All I'm getting is horoscopes.
No, but Scorpius robot, man.
Okay, they are pretty cool, although likely to be ineffective in combat.
Yeah, but they look awesome.
We have had scorpion-based robots in Robot Wars. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was made of... What's the word I'm looking at? Fiberglass, that's the one. And it had 2, like, grinding discs as claws at the front, and then a big tail that came over the top and did nothing. Oh, I found it. Its first incarnation had a chainsaw nose.
Wow.
Oh, it was literally called Scorpion. That was easy.
What?
Tangents.
Welcome to Spinnerproof, the podcast where Ryan and Sam Google robots for 2 hours.
I'd listen.
Oh my goodness me. The one in Extreme 1.
Oh, it also has a rear-mounted blade. I forgot about that.
But like, look at the picture of Scorpion in Extreme 1. It's got a giant thing on the back of it.
It's meant to be a tail, I believe.
Well.
Oh, that's when they went for the lifter setup as well.
Yeah, I do
fair,
not think that looks like a tail.
There were quite a few incarnations of this.
That looks like something else.
I'm not seeing it.
What?
I have a clean mind.
I don't believe you.
Should we get back to Battlebots? This was a fun diversion, but I feel like we should get back. Son of Waiachi.
Son of Waiachi, yes.
Also, by the way, you said 3 out of these 4 were good. So far, we've both panned both of them.
That's true. Well, I'd sort of forgotten what they are. So far, I think there's going to be 1 out of the 3 that's good. And
yeah, I'm feeling that way as well now.
And that 1 is going to be Son of Waiachi.
And even this, I don't particularly like. I respect it rather than like it.
It's a very like minimal body with a massive 3-prong spinner above it.
The issue I have is that I don't like the history of Son of Waiachi. The current design I quite like.
You'll have to give me a brief history lesson on this robot then.
Basically, this is something we're going to talk about in episode 4, so I don't want to get into it in too much detail, but they basically abused the rules on walkers to have a super powerful robot for a long time.
Did they have like a shuffling bot or something that was...
Yeah, cam-based shuffling, which, whilst a really cool idea, there was a lot of difficulty around it in the rules, and it all eventually got sort of tidied up.
So how much extra weight did they get as a result of that then?
I think they were allowed to double their weight.
Good lord.
Yeah, check out a robot called Drillzilla from Robot Wars Extreme Warriors.
Drillzilla. Let me... more Googling.
This is what we do here.
Oh, showing results for FileZilla. No, I do not want to do FTP stuff. Okay, Drillzilla.
Now, this only got, I think, a 50% weight boost in the end. But this is a robot that went against Razor, and Razor literally could not touch it because its armour was able to be that thick.
Good lord.
Razor didn't even make a scratch on this thing. And it was just as fast, if not faster than most wheeled robots.
Yeah.
So the Walker rules had to be updated, and Son of Waiachi abused this for a while. I say abused it, obviously, if you're competitive, you're going to do that.
Yeah.
But they also made a really ugly robot using this system because they just put all the weight into the weapon.
What was that robot called? I must see it.
Oh, it was Son of Waiachi. Or it might have just been Waiachi, actually.
Super heavyweight.
Super heavyweight.
It didn't fight that much though. Like I'm looking at this, it was in one series, and then the rules were changed.
Was it only? I'm sure I saw it in more series, unless Son of Waiachi then did it in a different weight class.
I think Son of Waiachi, because like Son of Waiachi originally had the same, apparently anyway, according to what I'm looking at, had the same mobility, but just at a lighter weight class. That is not an attractive robot, I have to say.
It's really not, is it? It was effective but ugly.
Yeah. But you can definitely
Because I was watching a few Mechavore fights earlier, which was an old robot that I quite like the design of, and it went up against one of the versions of Son of Waiachi, and it was ugly as hell. Must have been season 3 or 5, I can't remember which, probably 3.
I don't know.
Well, you should know.
So can you tell me a bit more about this like Team Waiachi? Because there's a lot of, I feel like there's at least 2 robots that seem to be built and entered by this sort of like Waiachi clan or whatever it is, whatever they...
Okay, so they have, in this series of Battlebots, Son of Waiachi and Warrior Clan.
Okay.
Which are similarly sort of done in aesthetics. They're very different robots, very different ideas. They also have a lot of robots in the lower weight classes that I couldn't tell you a huge amount about.
I'm sorry, I've just been completely shape. I'm looking at the way it's the spinner is attached. It's sort of like a huge cog underneath it, and then all these tiny little ones. I'm trying to figure out what drives what. Are the little ones just there to keep it all centered, or are they actually driving this thing around? I don't know. It's very interesting.
I believe they're using multiple motors to drive the weapon.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly looks like they could do. They must have maybe 9 small cogs around this larger
And it does
cog.
have a ridiculously fast spin up on that weapon as well.
Yeah.
I know they also have a load of drive motors in there. Basically, lots of motors. They love motors.
There's a lot of stuff going on there. It's a very, very, very compact robot as well.
Well, it has to be to really make that weapon work at the weight they have available.
Yeah, definitely. There 2 fights they had in this. They fought Ghost Raptor and won because Ghost Raptor basically tore itself to pieces because it's a rubbish robot with a stupid design,
really is.
and we'll come on to that. And then they fought Poison Arrow, and Poison Arrow were probably the underdogs in this fight. And Poison Arrow spun up their drum, came in, and then sent Son of Waiachi so high in the air, it was ridiculous. It was just a huge throw up, and then because obviously they're all spinning, it just stays completely flat and level up and then down again. And that was it. That was all she wrote. And Poison Arrow.
You say Poison Arrow are underdogs. Anything can happen when it's a vertical versus a horizontal.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. But Poison Arrow was seeded much lower than Son of Waiachi.
It was a good matchup for Poison Arrow, I think, personally.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I was very glad to see Son of Waiachi out. Because I kind of enjoy watching full body spinners. Because full body spinners go wrong spectacularly. You know, as soon as they start getting out of their plane, they start dancing around all over the place, and it's hilarious.
Yep.
Son of Waiachi has the sort of strategy of a full body spinner, but without the work.
What do you mean?
It has the big overhead weapon, which is kind of an easier thing to design, really, than a full body spinner, because you're not working at the same tolerances, and it can just hit anything that comes at it. It's just boring to watch. It gives you big hits, but that's it.
Yeah. I don't know. I've middling feelings about it, to be honest.
Ghost Raptor, then. You're not a fan.
No, not at all. And I feel like I'm with the team behind Son of Waiachi on this. In that the team, I'm sure, are lovely people. Their robot is ridiculous. They've got this huge... I've just seen the welding as well. Huge.
Oh, no.
Huge bar spinning thing that's raised up on some articulating arm thing, and it's very flimsy, and it's at an angle by default, which we know we don't like, and it's got ugly welding, and they can move it around, and the whole robot has a lot of flex in it, and I think in this fight or in another one anyway, it catches itself and tears itself to pieces. I don't get it. I was kind of hoping you'd like it so that you could explain to me why this is in fact a brilliant robot with a fantastic and unique design. But we both see it for what it is, which is rubbish.
Did you watch last series?
No, I didn't.
That last series is the reason that I don't like Ghost Raptor. Because what happened in the 2015 series is that Ghost Raptor's bar broke after, I believe, the first fight. And they went on to win a couple more fights without it. In one, they set themselves up as a lifter, and that went well. The other, however, was against Icewave. And what they did to fight Icewave was take their weird lifty army thing, put on it a big stick with a, like, Y section on the end, and just use that to hold Icewave away. And that was their strategy for the whole fight. I'm not a fan of custom making a weapon for a specific opponent. That feels like a very Tornado thing to do. And ever since, I've not liked them.
Yeah, but what about Razor's answer to that with the hook thing? That was glorious.
Fire with fire, don't you? The other thing with Ghost Raptor as well that I don't like, I agree with you, is the whole spin on an arm thing. That must be limiting the energy that bar can carry. And it's already quite a lightweight, flimsy-looking bar.
Yeah.
It just seems like an overcomplicated mess of a robot.
It is very overcomplicated. So I've talked about, obviously, if you've got your spinning thing at an angle, that makes turning difficult. Even if you've got like a vertical spinner, you can see they're turning and they gyro dance a lot. And then they've got one where they can gyro dance as a result of trying to turn their robot, but they can gyro dance just trying to move their weapon around. It's just weird, I think the thing that really gets me about it is how damn flimsy it is. Like the left side of the robot just isn't connected to the right side of the robot, save for like I think just one axle across the back of it or something. It can just twist and bend so much, it's ridiculous. So it's no surprise, really, that it catches the front of itself and twists itself in two. It's just stupid.
The flexible wedgelets I like as an idea. It's kind of like when things like Panic Attack used to have the side skirts. It guarantees that it's going to stay riding on the floor, and it means that when it gets hit, it might just sort of jostle around a bit, taking a bit of the energy out of that hit.
Yeah.
I can understand the rationale behind that. However, designing it in such a way that it can come up and impede your weapon...
Yeah.
Bit of an oversight, to say the least.
Yes, just a little bit. So, silly robot. They had, fighting against Son of Waiachi and lost, and then they were wild-carded back, and they fought Razorback and lost.
Why were they wild-carded as well?
I don't know, man. They were, I don't know. I guess because of last series, maybe? Just because of that? I can't remember. Oh, man.
There are so many good robots that could have been wild-carded back in. Death Roll I'd love to see more of. Disco Inferno I'd have liked to have seen again. One of the Crushers maybe you'd quite like to see.
Yeah.
But no, we get another spinner.
Another spinner and a rubbish one at that. I think they brought it back because of last series, and they also probably wanted to try and get a lot out of the team behind Son of Waiachi's, because there was a lot of the shots from the pits and stuff where they're sort of trash talking each other. Like the guy who's the Son of Waiachi team are really sort of laying into that robot in the same way that we are, in that it's a stupid robot design. So. I imagine...
Oh no, we agree with Team Waiachi. That can't be happening.
It's happened.
Oh well, while we're in a mood to complain...
What do you mean complain?
Let's get on to the topic of flames and drones and Minibots. This is a thing that is exclusive to Battlebots. Pretty much all three of them. We've seen some people in Robot Wars try the whole Minibot thing. None of it with any real effect. But the drones are particularly new and particularly terrible.
Yeah, but drones with flamethrowers. Drones with flamethrowers. It's like the 6-year-old in me loves it.
So what you want to do is have a very lightweight flying machine and then just create turbulence underneath it with a flamethrower. That's what you like.
It just looks awesome, man. They're utterly pointless. I want to be really clear. They're utterly pointless, and if you're trying to win something, don't have them. But as a spectacle, they are hard to beat, I have to say.
I wouldn't mind if there were a bit more flexibility in the way they were used.
I think there are very, very strict rules about what you can do with the drones, so...
Yeah, you literally can't fly them anywhere near the walls or ceiling.
Yeah.
Which, as a flying machine, bit of an issue. Especially the not being able to get near the ceiling part.
Yeah, you gotta stay nice and low.
It's one of those things, I don't know if it... I mean, obviously we don't know if there's going to be a new series at all. If there is a new series, I would hope they wouldn't allow them, but I feel like people aren't really going to use them anymore anyway, or at least I'd hope.
Oh, people will still use them. I think there are enough people competing that are just sort of there for a bit of a show as well. So I think they'll do that for the show, if nothing else.
Did the drones really put on a good show though?
The drones themselves didn't necessarily do it, but they have they bring about certain moments, like I think Poison Arrow, was it, using a rake to knock one out of the sky.
Hypershock, that was.
Oh, Hypershock, yeah, sorry. It was one of the green drum spinners.
Yeah, one of the nearly identical. No, not at all alike.
Yeah. So that was quite funny. And flames, man. They've got flamethrowers.
My two favourite drone moments involve the destruction of drones. That's the only thing I enjoy to do with drones in the whole series.
What about like all the Minibots and stuff? A lot of teams seem to like having these tiny little wedges that they drive around to annoy people.
Son of Waiachi is actually a good example of that, because in the fight against Ghost Raptor, they did manage to get Ghost Raptor kind of stuck on their Minibot.
Didn't they also get stuck on their own Minibot?
Yes, they did. Yeah, as a sort of nuisance thing, I can see the appeal. And if you had a robot like Beta or something like that, where you need an opponent to be kind of still for you to get a really good hit on them, I can see why it would be useful. Not quite sure why a robot like Son of Waiachi would need it. All they need to do is get near an opponent and they're hitting them no matter what.
Just because they can.
I think that is basically the reason. I think that's the reason for all of these things. The flamethrowers as well. How many effective flamethrowers have we seen in Battlebots? One.
One whole flamethrower. But I think that's worth it. Allowing flamethrowers for the sake of it is fine. I actually don't mind having flamethrowers that are all for show, as long as it doesn't compromise too much. So obviously, we talked about Blacksmith having a stupid flamethrower in there. Like, I don't do that. But the flamethrower that's in something like Chomp or Warhead I think that's quite cool. I think that adds a spectacle, adds some enjoyment. Again, the 6-year-old in me really loves it. So, and Sergeant Bash, my favourite house robot. I like me some flamethrowers.
The issue with flamethrowers is that they must be a nightmare for the cameramen.
Yeah.
If you watch the old series of Robot Wars in particular, there are many moments where you're just blinded for 5 seconds by Sergeant Bash or by the flame pit.
Yeah. Exposure is hard. That's getting easier though, because obviously like cameras are getting more and more dynamic range with every passing generation of sensors. So that's going to get better.
And the silly thing is, in theory, flames aren't a bad idea as a weapon, because it isn't sort of contentious, this idea of heating a robot up is bad for it. In Robot Wars, we see quite a lot of teams paying quite a lot of attention to their flame proofing because they got the flame pit there.
Yeah.
So it is something that causes some headaches in a way, but the way robots deploy it, with the exception of complete control, it is purely for show. And that makes it a gimmick.
It's a gimmick I can get behind.
You of all people, getting behind a gimmick.
Me of all people. Because it's awesome, man. It looks cool.
You baffle me for once.
I think it's pretty firmly established that if something looks cool, I'm going to like it a lot more.
There was one flamethrower I could really get behind, and that was in the 2015 series, and it was the one on Witch Doctor's Minibot, because it was green.
Ah, awesome.
Just throwing some kind of copper compound in there and going, ooh, green flame.
Green flame.
If every team is required to have their own colour of flamethrower, then I'll get behind it.
Do some kind of like rainbow flamethrower, man. Have like like a minigun, right? It's got like the 6 or 8 barrels or whatever that spin around. Have each one of those be an individual colour of flame, and shoot these long jets of coloured flame out of them, and then spin the whole thing up.
Skittlespot.
How cool would that be, man? Ah.
Only marginally more cool than the existing flamethrowers.
So worth it. And then who is it? Is it Stinger, the killer bee, the one that has the upward facing flamethrower, and they're fighting Megatento. And then there's flames underneath. It's just, I don't know. I can see why you don't like them, but they look cool, and that's fine by me. I think, again, if you're trying to be competitive, probably not the best weapon, because obviously you're using a bunch of weight allowance carrying fuel, which you could maybe be putting into a more useful weapon, but.
I'm dubious as to how much fuel you're actually likely to use, though.
It's probably not a huge amount, but I feel like the tank you'd need probably weighs more than the fuel.
Yeah, and the protection for that tank is probably quite heavy, because obviously you can't just have that, just hanging on the outside of your robot on a thread. You got to protect that fairly well.
Yeah, I would love to see flamethrowers in Robot Wars again. Even
I would love to see Sergeant Bash in Robot Wars. I wouldn't want competitor flamethrowers.
Even if it's only Sergeant Bash, I'd be happy. But I'd quite like to see competitors with it as well. But that's just me. I think my favourite.
I can just see loads of competitors using it when it doesn't give them any competitive advantage just because they feel they can.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think. My favourite weapon in the game Arenas of Destruction was there was like a plasma torch you could use.
You just went near stuff and it just
Exactly.
melted. Everything just fell off of it.
It didn't melt, it shattered because the physics engine is amazing.
Yes, true.
You just sit near a robot with your plasma torch on, and then the armor would just shatter and explode off.
Just flake off.
Yeah. I got that working the other day. I think I sent you a picture of this. I found that dug around in my old house, found that game again, and found some community-made patches that get it to work again. And the AI.
Oh, you got it working properly?
Running. I didn't get any further than when I last talked to you about it. So the AI is all kinds of messed up. It's really funny in a fight. So I got the game running, and then obviously I could only use a keyboard because it doesn't work with Xbox controllers. But then I'm thinking I definitely had a controller that worked with this game. And games controllers have two standards for how they can talk to the computer. So all the modern ones use a thing called X input, for what it's worth, and then there's the old one, which is like direct input. So I found a controller that has a switch on the back of it for choosing between them, and I got all that working again, and had a nice controller, just how I like it with the robot, nice games controller, and then found that the AI is so messed up that the robot you're fighting in certain game modes will just stay completely stationary unless a house robot is moving, in which case they'll both come and attack you. And then the house robot will lose interest. It will drive back to its corner patrol zone, and then the robot you're fighting will just freeze in place as soon as the house robot stops.
I'm sorry, all I heard there was lose interest. That's what I did. First world problems. I think we will actually have something to say about this next robot.
No, it's a boring robot. It's just a standard drum spinner.
I mean, you're not wrong.
This is, for me, the definitive drum spinner.
That is fun. This is the quintessential drum spinner. That's what this is.
You know how there's like the kilogram, right? There's this block of metal somewhere in Paris. Well, at the moment there is, and that is the definition of the kilogram. All other weights and measures are based on this thing. Not for much longer. They're going to change it to some constant based on something else. But there is a block of metal in Paris under like 3 bell jars that is the kilogram. And if you broke in there and changed the weight of that, then you've changed the kilogram. And Minotaur is the drum spinner in this way for me.
This is Genesis in a sense, even though it didn't come first.
But I think it's the first drum spinner I saw that I loved. And I think a big part of that is the team. Or the guy driving it. I love him so much. And but their robot is fantastic as well.
It's funny, drum spinners have been around for a while in the lighter weight classes. And this season of Battlebots was when people suddenly started bringing drums as heavyweights. And you feel like Minotaur should have been like the hypnodisc of drums, done it first and everyone followed. But it seems like everyone's just made that move at once and they've done it by far the best.
Yeah. I'm on the Battlebots website. Favourite robot is Ava from Ex Machina.
Ooh, that's
a weird robot to choose. It's a great film though. You should go watch that if you haven't. But
yeah, if you haven't watched it, it is a very good film. It's just a bit weird.
It's a bit of a weird robot to choose.
Anyway, to the machine. Every single fight that Minotaur is in is a great fight.
Yeah.
And that is a testament to the robot itself. And also to the driving of the robot.
Yeah.
Because as we've discussed so many times, a big vertical spinner like this, whether it's disc or drum, is not an easy thing to control.
No, not at all.
And that guy, whose name I'm not going to try and pronounce, has got this down to an art. There's a moment against Photon Storm, and I'm going to assume this was intentional, and you're going to argue it wasn't, where he's sort of on Photon Storm's wedge, and then he just turns, lifts the drum onto the tip of that beak and does some damage to it. I reckon he meant that. He's that good.
I'm not so sure as ever, but I think I agree. He's good enough, to be honest, that I could go either way for me. He's up there with drivers in the world. I don't know why I can understand why you're shying away from his surname, but he's just Daniel. What? That's all right.
Daniel? Daniel?
Just Daniel. I'm sure, like, Daniel, surname I won't try and pronounce, and then, yeah.
I could have gone with that, and yet I didn't. It's fine.
Such a hard name to pronounce.
The funny thing with Minotaur is that it's kind of hard to wax lyrical about the build of it, because the build is kind of basic. There's nothing in the build itself that is revolutionary or exceptional. It's just the whole thing.
There's definitely one thing that's revolutionary.
Oh.
Revolutionary.
Abandoned podcast.
Oh man, it is. I know what you mean. Like looking. If you just saw a picture of it, it looks a bit standard drum spinner, but it's. I don't know. I think a lot of it for me is the team, to be honest, but also just the way that the guy drives it, and I loved watching it just dismantle Bronco and behead Warhead later on and stuff. It's just great.
One of the key things to make it a successful spinner is reliability, and they've been building this kind of design for long enough that they've ironed out all of the kinks. So they've brought a robot that they know is going to perform every time they put it out in that arena.
Yeah, it's like the tombstone of drum spinners.
Exactly. That is the perfect way of looking at it, which is why we should have had a Tombstone Minotaur final.
Oh.
And we were denied by the worst robot in the universe.
We were denied by by Bombshell.
We should probably go into the Warhead fight as well, just because you've mentioned it.
Yeah, go on.
I mean, we love Warhead, but that was just a beautiful... I want to call it a passing of the torch. I suppose it's kind of not, in a sense, that Warhead didn't really have a torch to pass. But in terms of robots I've loved in Battlebots, it definitely passed that torch.
Yeah, so Warhead was with their big disc configuration, which I think is the one they normally use, and Minotaur just gets with its uppercutting drum there, just tears the disc clean off and sends it flying.
And of course, it comes down still flat and just skids around the arena for a while.
Oh yeah, it was good.
Absolute beauty of a fight. And then, of course, just that. It's not brutality from that drum, is it? That drum is too fast to be delivering big, brutal hits. It just shreds things gently, almost. if that can be a thing.
It just tickles their opponents to death.
Yeah, it just removes armour millimetre by millimetre.
Yeah, they do get big hits occasionally, though. Every now and again, their tooth does dig in and send robots absolutely flying.
Just beautiful. Just beautiful. That's all I can say. Photon Storm.
Photon Storm. Another inferior razor that I swear this has the wrong shaped beak as well. I mean, I feel like it's sort of, I feel like the point is in the wrong place. It's almost like if you got your finger and you imagine, like, instead of pushing straight down, you're sort of pushing at an angle, like with the back of your finger pushing down. I don't know. It seems weird.
I can see why you're saying that, but I also massively disagree.
I assume
and you do have to remember that this robot did extremely well on the live tour for years.
Live tour, man. We're not talking about the live tour. We're talking about what we saw on television.
And we're ignoring everything else. I'm not sure this is an inferior razor. In terms of power, this is probably better than Razor.
Nothing is better than Razor.
The difficulty is that Crushers aren't necessarily that viable at the moment.
No.
But what we have to say is what an iconic team this is. Ed Hoppit from Storm 2, Andrew Marchant from Tornado, Tim Bentz, who I honestly don't know that much about, and then Alan Young as well, who used to run a lot of the live events and was one of the people that built Apollo. If we're going to have a British super team, that's not bad going.
It's not bad going. I wish they'd have built a better robot.
Also originally built by Sam Smith, now of Team Carbide fame.
Well, good for them.
You just hate it because it's not Razor.
Look,
it's the only thing you don't like about it.
If you put that beak on something, then you're immediately going to get compared to Razor, and you're immediately going to fail that comparison.
In a direct fight between Photon Storm and Razor, Photon Storm is winning.
And that would make me very, very sad to see.
Surely you're used to seeing Razor lose. It did happen quite a lot.
I know, and it's sad every single time.
Pussycat was sad. The others, just entertaining or angering.
Oh dear, it's all sad. Their favourite robot is Beta.
Good.
And they're sponsored by VMware for some reason. Why is virtual machine stuff?
Because Ed Hoppit works for VMware.
Fair enough.
That's why.
Don't complain to him about all the bugs I have when I'm trying to run virtual machines at work.
We do, however, get to move on to Complete Control. One of my favourite robots from this series.
Is this because of what it did to Bombshell?
This robot was involved in what I would say are 2 of the top 6 or 7 fights of the series. This is a robot that has been around for donkey's years. It's always followed the same idea of a sort of grabber lifter, and this time they've added fire. And they've added fire in a way that can actually work.
I think the key difference is this is not like a normal flamethrower in like a spraying some kind of flammable liquid and then setting fire to it. I feel like it's got some kind of like propane torch or something, like a properly hot flame that they can.
It's a blowtorch.
Or yeah,
basically,
that they can direct, because obviously it's built into their lifter grabber thing, so they can grab something, hold it, as we see in their fight against Bombshell, hold it there, and then just hold them directly in the path of in basically the hottest part of this flame, and do an enormous amount of damage.
Absolutely. The rules state that you can hold something while stationary for 10 seconds, or if you're moving around while holding it, you get 30 seconds. 30 seconds on that torch is enough to disable just about anything.
Yeah.
Obviously, not easy to get hold of something, and if you're up against a spinner, basically impossible, but Bombshell was perfectly sized and shaped.
Well, Bombshell was using its axe, I think, in this one. I think this is the only fight they used their axe. Mm-hmm. And I imagine they came to regret it.
The only downside I can see with the build of Complete Control is that it seems like a very large robot for what it is, and it's not particularly well optimised defensively.
Yeah.
And I worry that they're doing that just to keep it looking like the previous versions.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm trying to think, all they could really do is make it like lower and flatter to put thicker armor on. I don't think they could make it any smaller width and length, because they need that for stability when they're trying to lift something up. And then
absolutely. You need a sort of footprint, as it were, don't you?
And also in the middle of the robot, they're going to always have that height, I think, because of the mechanism they're using, that they have to use to do that lifting part of their grappler. I don't think there's a lot they could do that's much smaller than this, to be honest. I do think it's probably about as small as it can be and still be effective.
2015 Bike Force had a very effective lifter-grabber system that all worked off of a single axle. I see no reason why they couldn't make a similar system work.
Yeah.
I think it's more of a stylistic choice that they've made.
Well, these robots, they get a brand, they get an image, and I think if you stray too far from it, it's a different robot, really, isn't it?
Is it a bad thing that it's a different robot?
Well, I mean, I would imagine if you're competing on television, you probably want to have a robot that's very recognisable. Like, you don't want to be in a situation where it's like, well, was that Poison Arrow, or was that the other green one? This name escapes me again. You don't want to be in that situation. You want to have a robot that's iconic and unique looking, and once you've got that and you've got that recognition, then you probably don't want to go changing it too much.
To me, and this might just be a me thing, I recognise a robot by its sort of mode of operation. What is it trying to do? So the idea of Complete Control being a grabber lifter, that's the thing that to me is part of its brand and maybe a bit of colour scheme.
Yeah, but so if its mode of operation is flipper, then you've got Expulsion, Apollo, Chaos 2, God knows how many other wedge-shaped flippers that are all the same robot by that logic. And they are in some ways, but they're also all very uniquely identifiable by what they look like.
Expulsion was a spinner, but I think you were going for Eruption.
Eruptions, yeah, sorry, I'm sorry. You know what I mean. You knew the robot I was going for. I'm confused by Explosion, that's the...
And I would argue that most flippers are basically the same.
Yeah, but they're
really?
They're not the same robot though, are they? Like Eruption and Apollo are different robots. I know they're the same weapon and the same rough shape, but they're different robots. And if you go and take the people that built Apollo and they build a completely different robot that's still a flipper and they called it Apollo, it's like, well, that's not Apollo anymore. That's a different robot. Use a different name, and that's great. Like, if teams want to do that, go for it. If you've got a robot that you want to make more effective for some reason in your next round, then do it and rename it. But like, I don't know.
I'm trying to think of examples of where this has actually happened, where a team have come back with a very different robot and called it sort of a version 2 of what they had before. Can you think of any?
You mentioned one in our last episode.
Was it Bite Force?
It might have been Bite Force. It was something.
Damn, I was hoping you'd forgotten about that, because that makes me a hypocrite.
Because
But again, they changed their mode of operation. They went from this grabber lifter to being a vertical bar spinner.
Yeah, and that's fine. Well done to them. They should have renamed it.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with that.
And I'm saying
we agree on that bit.
And if Complete Control redesigned to be a much smaller, more compact robot, I would argue they should rename it, because it's a different robot. It's
still doing the same thing though. It's still a control bot, which is integral to the name.
Yeah, but it's doing the same thing as Jellyfish by your reasoning, and it's a different robot. They're not the same thing.
Doing it. I really thought we were going to go an episode without mentioning Jellyfish. Thanks for that. They're not doing the same thing because one's linear and one is vertical. And it's grabbing and lifting. That's like saying that it's the same as Razor because it grabs things. No, it lifts them as well. And then, in this incarnation...
Are you saying it's the same as Razorback? Are you saying that Razorback and Complete Control are the same robot?
No, Razor.
No, and I'm saying Razorback because it's the same thing. It's a vertical, like, grabber-lifter thing. They're the same mode of operation, but they're different robots because they look completely different.
It's tracked. That's a different mode of operation. It's invertible. Different style of operation.
If they completely redesigned this robot with the same weapon, it would be a different robot. It just
Or
would.
would it be a refinement of this robot that's just taken a larger step?
They could do small changes. They could bring in the sides a bit or whatever. But like, if you went into a completely different chassis shape, if you gave it the chassis shape of Son of Waiachi, and instead of having a big spinner on top of it, you put this grabber lifter thing, it's a different robot.
Is this going to get a bit Trigger's Broom if we're not careful?
We're dangerously close to philosophy, but like. I mean,
physics.
the problem is by that kind of reasoning of the mode of operation, then you've got so many robots that are all sort of fundamentally the same thing. I mean, so like Photon Storm and Razor, they're both wheeled wedge-shaped robots with a big beak on the front of it, but they're clearly very different robots, and the difference is what they look like.
But then look at Photon Storm and Mohawk.
Find a picture.
They're basically the same, but one's got flames.
Yeah, but they're
Because
different robots,
they're
aren't
trying to
they?
do the same thing, and they're doing it the same way.
But my point is, they're not the same robot. You're not going to look at them and say, "Oh, they're both Photon Storm." They're
I'm
different.
not saying
robots.
they're twins.
But your argument about the main differentiator being their mode of operation seems to be that all the robots that are doing fundamentally the same thing are all fundamentally the same robot, and by some reasoning they are. But my point is that the aesthetic and the shape of the robot forms a brand that's important to the robot. Complete Control looks the way it does, and it's important that it looks the way it does to be recognisable as Complete Control. And if they
You're making out that I'm saying the only thing that defines any robot is their weapon.
That's the only argument you've made so far.
I'm saying that's the main part of their brand in my head. I'm not saying other people have to agree. I'm not saying it's the only thing. I'm not saying that Chaos 2 was literally just a rear hinge flipper. I'm not saying that, Danton Kia and Chaos 2 are identical. You're insufferable. And I probably am too.
I think we're both insufferable. Oh, dear.
I like Complete Control, but I think it could be made better.
Most things could be made better. No, there is no perfect design.
I can't. I'm perfect.
Complete Control also had a wonderful fight against Warhead.
Oh, yes, it did.
I think my favourite moment in the series.
Go on, tell us all about it. It'll be therapy for you.
So, Warhead and Complete Control, they have a big hit near the beginning, and then both robots have that kind of like dazed, sitting around for a few seconds, and you think, are they both knocked out? This is rubbish. And then at some point, Warhead gets flipped. I forget the exact mechanism by which it gets flipped, but it ends up upside.
It flips itself.
It flips itself. It ends up upside down, and then it articulates. So this is the only effective use of an articulating spinner thing, by the way. I know I'm a bit hypocritical for doing this, but they articulate. They change the angle of their massive spinning dome thing, and then basically head spin across the arena, and then somehow manage to hit Complete Control again while head spinning across. It's spectacular.
It is going to be one of the iconic moments of Battlebots forevermore, I hope.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
But you're also missing a great moment where Complete Control basically explodes.
Yeah, they get set on fire.
Presumably their own fuel source again going up. And then insult to injury with the head spin.
Head spin, man. I love it so much. I don't know what causes Complete Control to blow up there, but it is... I don't know. It's just a great fight all round, really, and it's one that Warhead win.
I mean, it isn't a good fight, as in it isn't a good contest.
It's a spectacular
But it's a
fight.
it's a spectacle. That's exactly what it is. It's an exhibition almost. Do we finally go there?
Bombshell, go.
Let's do the technical stuff first.
So Bombshell is another Swiss Army bot, and it's a proper Swiss Army bot. They have modular weaponry, so they've got a fairly small, compact base with all their drive and stuff in it, and then they can plug in all kinds of different weapons. They've got this horizontal spinner thing that's on an arm that they can move up and down. They've got a big vertical spinner, and they've got an axe, and they've got some kind of lifting weapon as well. And it's a bit mad.
Which never got used.
They've got a quick drive. I do think their drive section of their robot is quite good. For me, the axe is a silly weapon for a robot of that size with that kind of footprint. They they just end up really unbalanced. It's not a very good weapon. I think their most effective setup is their vertical spinner, and I think if they went just as a vertical spinner, they would. Well, I would say they'd do better, but they did pretty damn well anyway. But they'd be a more favourable robot, I think, for us.
I have to respect the work that must go into making a robot modular in this way.
I think they've got the biggest team I've seen as well. Like the team picture on the Battlebot website has 9 people in it. It's quite the team.
But how many of them are actually technical people, and how many of them are literally flag wavers?
I would say there's 7 or 8 of them are quite technical. There's someone that's credited as designer/costume, and then there's one who's just sort of like heading up the drone bot. I don't know, but most of them are lifted, and then Michael Jeffries, he's just listed as captain/driver. I don't know how technical he is, but there's a lot of like people that are like listed as fabricators and stuff, who are like building various things and responsible for individual weapons and stuff. So I think what they've got is they've got a few people that are doing core things and a few people that are building like a specific weapon for it and stuff. So I think they've got quite a technical team, to be honest, in general.
Shall I go on my rant?
Do it.
As I was saying before, I really respect the work that must go into designing a robot like this. It cannot be at all easy to make a robot that has literally 4 different ways of working. Mad respect for doing that. But this kind of annoyingly treads on the toes of what we were just saying about this idea of a mode of operation. To me, the best thing about robot combat is that it's a rock, paper, scissors kind of system. Certain types of robot are strong against one type, weak against another. And that means that in the draw of a tournament, anything could happen. There are robots out there that would be much better at beating Tombstone than others. The potential for an upset like that to come up, for me, is what makes this excellent. As soon as you're changing the fundamental idea of how your robot works, you are breaking that glorious system.
They should give the robots a different name.
Oh, God. I knew we shouldn't have had that conversation first. Take Aftershock, for example. Aftershock trades its disc for a bar when it's going up against a big horizontal. Fantastic. Very sensible, tactical decision. Makes for a better fight. All for it. It still functions in the same fundamental way. Look at something like Behemoth with the different scoops. Fantastic. You're literally sticking a different thing on the end of the arm that you use. It still functions the same way. Bombshell, they're literally like running it backwards in some configurations and forwards in others. They've got a big kinetic energy weapon. They're technically 3 of them are kinetic. I know what I mean. They've got the big axe there, which works completely differently to the horizontal spinner, works completely differently to the vertical spinner. I believe they're all working off of their own sort of integrated motor systems and all of that. So, in theory, if the vertical spinner got destroyed, they still got 3 weapons they can switch to instead of having to do the work of fixing it.
I wonder if they've basically got like a USB port in the bottom of their robot somewhere that is just aware of the other robot. It's just got like maybe USB-C, so it's got the power delivery stuff, and then they just plug it in, and it goes, oh, dun, I've detected a new weapon, and that's it.
Installing drivers. It's just, I don't want to call it cheating, but it's basically cheating. It's cheating that's allowed within the rules. The whole idea of robot building, to me, is you have an idea, you make it, and you test it against other people's ideas. In an ideal world, everyone would be just as technically, what's the word I'm looking for? Skilled.
Adept.
Yeah, adept is more the word I was looking for. In an ideal world, everyone's got that same set of skills, everything works exactly as it's meant to, and it's just a test of ideas. What they've gone is, let's make, a vertical spinner. Oh, but vertical spinners aren't good against this kind of robot. Okay, we'll make a horizontal to deal with those. Oh, what about robots that aren't, that are strong against spinners full stop? We'll make a lifter. What about other robots? Oh, we'll make an axe as well. Where do you stop?
But that's their idea, that they're testing against other people's ideas.
Their idea is to have every idea.
Yeah, their idea is a modular robot. And they do very well with it.
It doesn't have the purity that I like. Minotaur is pretty much the perfect drum spinner. Tombstone is pretty much the perfect horizontal. Bronco is a very good flipper. Beta is the best hammer we've ever seen. This isn't the best of anything, except maybe the best at being modular.
It's a jack of all trades.
Exactly, yeah. If it just had one of those setups, it wouldn't get anywhere. And I realise that, as you say, kind of makes it a good solution to that problem. But I still don't like it.
I don't feel as strongly about it as you do. I do think that I agree with you that they're outside of the spirit of that rule of like modular weaponry. I think I agree with you that it's nice to have variations on a theme for different types of weapon. But I mean, these are 4 fundamentally different robots, as you say. They are 4 different robots. Their most effective weapon, like I said, is their vertical spinner, and they use that the most. And it would be nice if they just went with one and stuck to it.
I do love the horizontal spinner idea. The idea of being able to adjust that height. Okay, it looks a bit silly in the way that it's implemented. If you did it as your whole robot, maybe it could have looked a bit better. But as an idea, that is fantastic because that is giving you variety of strategy within a single design. And it's a strategy that you can change mid-fight as well, which they did against Cobalt. They came out aiming for the weapon chain and just lifted it up a bit to then go for the tires instead. That's brilliant. Come out with that every time and I'll love you. Come out with an axe every time and I'll love you as well because I just love axes.
You could do that kind of adjustable height horizontal spinner thing in a design that's much closer to the likes of Tombstone or Carbide or something, or Cobalt, of not having the silly arm hanging over it and then sort of like hanging this spinner below it. You could have a much more sturdily mounted spinner that can go up and down if it was your only weapon. But because they've got this as a modular thing, because this has got to fit into the same frame as everything else, they have to do that kind of weird arm that hangs over it. It's like holding a spinning lantern in front of it or something.
I'm interested to know which weapon idea came first as well, if it was designed specifically around one more than another. Because to me, the vertical spinner is the one that makes most sense on the robot visually.
Yeah, I mean, just everything about the vertical spinner is the thing that makes the most sense. It makes the most sense in terms of what it looks like, in terms of how it performs. I wonder if that was the original, and then it's done more with than they've added the other ones. I don't know.
I imagine they set out to make it modular and kind of designed all 4, but
yeah, I mean, they all integrate fairly well, to be fair.
oh yeah, they're extremely well designed. It is a very intelligent piece of robot designing and building, but I was still very happy to see it get smashed. Oh, we had to wait, but when it got smashed, it got smashed. Ray Billings is not a man that holds back.
He wasted no time.
It doesn't help that it took out my favourite robot as well. Obviously, that's never helpful. Let's just get on to Warhead then, which is weird because we've already said quite a lot about it.
It's a fire-breathing T-Rex thing. It's my favourite configuration. I love it with
you
the T-Rex.
You actually like the grab a head thing?
Right, so I want to separate a few things here quickly. Warhead, I think, is a work of art, and I really love the way it looks. Just as an aesthetic thing, freaking love it. As a robot that can win the competition, no way in hell will that ever win anything like with that configuration. It won one fight with the grabbing head thing against a Weldon Overlord, and we'll come on to why they won that one in a minute. For every fight they're in that they win by being a better robot is when they've got their actual weapon on it, the spinning dome thing. But with the fire-breathing T-Rex head on the top of it, it's a work of art, and I love like the curling arm things that come round and can move up and down, also with flamethrowers in them. Like I said, I don't think it's an effective robot. It's probably not a competitive robot, but it is wonderful.
Warhead is the nearest thing we have to a sort of mid-ground between the art bots and the competitive bots.
Yeah.
In that it's made to look good and it packs a real punch. So in that respect, it's more competitive than you would maybe expect. And I think the team, which for people that don't know is the old Razor team, are not the kind of people that would make something that is entirely function over form. They're always going to go for a mid-ground, and that's what they've achieved here.
Yeah, and they achieve it every time because they're brilliant people.
just fantastic humans.
If we just spot a common theme among the robots that I really love and talk about endlessly. What's the common link?
The jaw thing, though, I wasn't entirely sure about, and I do have to wonder if they ever planned on using it in any fight other than the one they got.
I doubt it. I mean,
that feels like a very nicely choreographed showpiece of the robots.
Yeah, that's not an accident that it's Warhead versus a Weldon Overlord. Like that's a planned thing. I think they probably would have done it in one fight if they didn't get a Weldon Overlord, just because it is so like amazing looking. They would have done it. I think. I don't know. Maybe not. But they got the perfect fight to use it.
It's also very well designed in that it runs off of the existing weapon motor and mounting.
Yeah. Is this
It's
a modular?
very smartly designed thing.
Is this a modular robot that you're all right with? Because these are two modes of operation.
It really is, because this is purely aesthetic.
But it's
a gimmick.
It's two different modes of operation. It's like it's got this grabbing flamethrower thing, and then it's got a spinning thing. They're completely different.
If they were trying to be competitive with it, I would have a problem. But because they are doing everything for show anyway, it works. Also, I think if any team in robot building in the world is allowed to abuse modular weapon rules, it is the Razor team. They've been on the wrong end of that twice now. They get a free pass.
So if they
we've got this spinner that needs a massive frame all around the robot to contain its awesome power. Stops working in a hit.
Oh dear.
Still bitter. Hashtag still bitter.
That was not cool.
It was childhood ruining, that was.
Yeah. I think we're both bitter about that
That is legitimate
situation.
Swiss Army bot cheating, by the way. I have no qualms about saying that is basically cheating.
But then they were within the rules. Like, I think it's silly that they allowed a robot that's bigger than the pit to compete. That's a ridiculous.
Apparently, it could have fitted. The issue there
How could it
was
possibly have fitted? It was bigger than the pit was.
if it went diagonal or something, apparently it had been measured and would have gone in. The bigger issue is that the rules at the time, and probably still now, stated that a change of weapon couldn't be a defensive addition to the robot.
Yeah. So the Tornado
That
put
was
that
clearly a defensive addition.
Yeah, they put that silly little spinner on it to to make it seem like an offensive one.
But anyway, back to the matter at hand instead of my bitterness.
I feel like Tornado had lots of other different weapons they could have done on there, didn't they? I feel like they had a bunch of different stuff by the end that they just didn't really get to use.
They apparently had an anti-spinner setup and an anti-hammer setup.
Yeah.
Which, judging by their names, definitely shouldn't have been allowed. And I know that at least one of them wasn't allowed. It was deemed to be a defensive addition. I think it was the anti-spinner setup, and we've never seen either of them. I'd love to see them.
Yeah, I would as well.
I'm imagining a massive weather vane or something for the anti-spinner one with tyres just all around the outside of the robot. Just gets spun up when it's hit by a spinner.
Yeah. Oh, wow, man. Imagine just lying here.
You sound excited.
Just cover your robot in fidget spinners.
Oh,
so that when something hits it, they all just spin and nothing else happens.
I feel like that's not quite how that works.
No,
but
it's
I'll let
not.
you have the mental image.
That's not how that would work at all. But I just think you should build a robot that's covered in fidget spinners just to really properly kill that.
Oh dear. A Walden Overlord!
Our
final and most ridiculous robot that we're going to like anyway.
I also love this robot. This is a humanoid robot. It's like a torso of a person with arms, and they're controlled in the same way that a person's arm is. They've got the same kind of joints, like a ball and socket, and then an elbow and possibly even a wrist. And then they've got these ligamenty type things that are going all over pulleys and stuff, with all the motors somewhere, presumably in the chest and stuff, that are puppeteering almost these arms around. And then the control scheme itself is they've got this huge, almost exoskeleton type thing that two people wear, like the Jaegers in Pacific Rim. And what they do with their arm is mirrored by the robot in the arena. It's ridiculous. It's overcomplicated. It's not at all competitive, and it's glorious. And I love it. And I want one.
To be fair, Rob Knight of Mortis fame, builder of Walden Overlord. I'm not going to get this out. This robot.
You should do like Kenny and just call it Obi Overlord.
That's cheating. So yeah, Rob Knight, the builder of Obi Overlord. His company basically makes stuff like this anyway.
Yeah.
Sort of humanoid robots of some kind. Really knows what he's doing with it. Overcomplicated is true. Uncompetitive is also true. The one thing that I would say is a sort of pragmatic solution on this robot is actually the control system. Because there's no other way you're going to do that, is there?
There's no way you could do that with a standard controller. No way at all. No way. No way.
It reminds me of a robot by a man whose name I'm going to mispronounce. Mark Satrakian, I'm going to pronounce it. From the very early days of Battlebots, who made a robot that was basically a giant snake. And he controlled it by having a sort of scaled down model of it in his hands, moving that how he wanted it to move,
Wow.
and that then sending the control inputs.
That's amazing.
It was absolutely brilliant. It was obviously pretty much useless as a fighting machine, but it looked really cool.
See, if you're gonna do gimmicky robots, you got to do like technically impressive gimmicky robots.
Yeah, do a gimmick that you've had to commit to so hard it's no longer a gimmick. It's a showpiece at that point. It's a concept.
I mean, so this robot fights with like a shield and a sword almost. It's just it's brilliant.
I'd like to see how competitive they could make it.
I think give it a few years and they could do more. I feel like the weakness is probably the fact that they've got it controlled using ligamenty type things, because they've made it inspired. Like it's not quite anatomically correct, but it's like it's inspired by the way that humans' arms move.
It's kind of animatronic, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I think if they did the same thing but used like motors in the arms and stuff, they could have arms that are much more sturdy and much more power behind them. And yeah, like another few years for that technology to improve and mature. I reckon you could have a surprisingly effective robot, but it would take a lot of skill, I think, to pilot it in a way that would let you win.
And also perhaps some very careful selection of opponents again.
Yeah, I can just imagine though, in a few years when it's really good, having a robot that can basically pick up Tombstone, for example, and then just use that to just attack other robots. Like in the melees in Robot Wars, just pick up Carbide and then push it at other things.
Perhaps a redesigned Complete Control could do that.
Yeah, I'd love to see someone do it. Like I think that's probably that would be the great thing you could do with grappling bots is grab a spinner and then use that as your weapon.
There was, in one of the series of Extreme, I think, I want to say Extreme 2, because Gravity was in it, there was a fight between some competitors and a couple of house robots. Gravity, big flipper if you don't remember it, was in that fight, lost drive but still had weapons. So one of its teammates in that fight did, I think, try and push it under something. Obviously there was a level of cooperation involved, but it was still bloody brilliant.
Amazing.
So there ends our robots for the week.
Yeah, I think we had a weak start with these robots, but a nice strong finish.
In Robot Wars, I have a strong opinion on most robots, because I can get the information about them. In Battlebots, especially when you've had a robot that hasn't gone very far, it is surprisingly hard to have much to say about them, isn't it?
Well, you just don't see enough of them. Like some of them get the only thing they get is a highlights reel, and that's it. You don't get any talks with the teams. They don't do those like stats overview things. There's nothing else. All you've got to go on is going slowly through a very short clip of the fight, and that's about it really. There's not much to be gleaned unless you do a lot of digging. I think a lot of teams probably do like AMAs and stuff on Reddit, which is wonderful if you really follow the communities for a long time. But when you're like me and sort of only just now really getting into following robot combat and stuff, going back to try and find AMAs on Reddit is near impossible, because Reddit is very much optimized for what's happening right now, and any content that was generated a week ago is basically impossible to find. It's infuriating.
The good news is, next episode, we have got some very good robots coming up. We've got Bite Force, the reigning champions. We've got Chomp, who have a lot of interesting features. Captain Shredderator as well, I feel we're going to have a lot to say on. Robots like, there's a few that we've spoken about already, actually, Beta, Lucky, all of that. There's some good stuff coming up next week, so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
For now, however, we should move on to our armchair engineering, which starts in an unorthodox manner. So this week, we've got quite a lot of armchair engineering specific feedback, and I really want to focus on the feedback we've had from Gareth Anstey, the owner of Dystopia, Utopia, and I imagine quite a lot of other robots in the lower weight classes as well. He was also the driver of my 29th favourite robot from Series 9, Trolley Rage. This is a man that knows what he's talking about. Now, he went through a lot of stuff, and we won't go through it all here. There's a link in the show notes for those that want to read all of it. But he did touch on two things that I think we both found interesting. Number one is a very short but sweet point, and that is that Battlebots flippers are running at much higher pressures than those in Robot Wars, which explains the sort of almost unreal power of things like Bronco that we see from what seem like quite poorly optimized flipper systems. The other thing that he also mentioned, he gave us a good overview, by the way, of why nitrogen over CO2 That's one for you guys to read. The other thing he mentioned...
No.
That
We're going to nitrogen over CO2 because nitrogen at high pressures will vaporize before it goes into the ram for the flipper. Whereas if you put CO2 at those kinds of pressures, it will stay a liquid as it goes into the system that fires the flipper, and that's not a good thing.
Okay, that was easiest to go through than I imagined. Fair play. The thing that, however, allows me to segue into what we're doing next is the fact that gas for flippers can actually be quite expensive and quite difficult to source at times. So we're going to have a look at gasless flipper systems.
So yeah, after last episode, I was thinking quite a lot about flipper design. I really like the design that Escape Velocity use, that kind of trying to find a way of doing a flipper that doesn't send yourself flying. And I was also trying to think of the other weaknesses of flippers. And one of those weaknesses is, we see this quite a lot in robots, we're certainly used to, is that flippers run out of their gas and then they're no longer very effective. So I was sort of thinking of ways of doing flippers that don't rely on gas, or at least can be recharged. So the first thing that I thought of was just use compressed air and have a compressor in your robot. But then I was sort of thinking a bit more cleverly, and I thought of using the same kind of technology that railguns use with linear motors, or linear induction motors is one particular type of them, and having that instead of a ram, because I feel like you'd get, I don't know, wild speculation time, I feel like you'd get more flips, and I also feel like it might be lighter than having a gas-powered flipper that you've then got to store gas for. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Linear induction is an idea that I'm used to almost entirely from roller coasters.
Yeah.
So it's something that I've been able to physically experience. And you do get massive acceleration from it. It's also something that's sort of being spoken about more and more with the whole Hyperloop thing that's going on, which I'm guessing you have some level of interest in.
Yeah, I do. Hyperloop is an idea by Elon Musk, who and the idea is to have a low pressure chamber or low pressure tunnel, so it's not quite vacuum but definitely lower pressure, and then basically have like a maglev train type thing in there. And they've had a test very recently. I think they got a test pod up to like 200 miles an hour in a very short space of time using
up to
this
200 and back to a standstill within 0.8 of a mile.
Yeah, so the actual like the final versions of this, not going to be that kind of acceleration. It's just they have to do that acceleration because they haven't got a long enough tunnel yet. But another one of Elon Musk's endeavours, the Boring Company, will solve that problem for them before long. Yeah, that's an interesting project, and presumably using linear induction. Although it might not be. I wonder if it might also be on wheels. I think certainly the early prototypes for some of the capsules were just on wheels.
I mean, they're at least using linear induction as a source of acceleration, I believe.
Yeah.
But that's by the by. What I'm saying is, it's something that has a lot of power in it, potentially. I don't know enough about it to really criticise it, so I've got a few questions for you that I'm not sure if you will have thought of.
Okay.
So the first thing is, I know that linear induction requires AC rather than DC.
Yep.
Is that a difficult thing to do on board the robot? Because obviously batteries are going to be DC.
So you can get converters to go from DC to AC. You can do it. You can... I'd have to go and look up exactly how those circuits work. Although I covered them in my degree, I've not looked at it in a long time.
Electrical engineer.
Yeah.
Here.
Well, no, I'm half an electrical engineer. Only half my degree
Electrical
was
engine. Or possibly an electrical ear.
Oh dear. But you can do it. So if you take a DC thing and then turn it on and off very quickly, you can get something that's close to AC, and then you could go mad and have a positive rail and a negative rail and alternate between them very quickly, and then you get alternating current that's still very digital, and then you can smooth it out with capacitors and stuff to get a reasonably nice looking sine wave out of there. So it's definitely something to be done. It's it's definitely doable.
Fair enough. Next question. Does this require particularly high voltages or currents? Because there are limitations on voltages specifically in Battlebots that I'm worried you would fall foul of here.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't done enough research into specific like models of linear motors. I've just sort of I did a bit of reading about the ideas in general, but I've not looked at the if you went and bought one, what are the specs for it to drive it? I wouldn't know. And that's certainly something that that I. Like I said, this is all just speculation for me. It was just sort of like idle considerations as I was driving home from work. It's like, well, what if you did a linear motor in a in your flipper instead, because then you've got get more energy density in batteries than you do in compressed air. So I don't know. It may be that you run afoul of rules around voltages and currents, but also maybe not. I feel like there have been robots that are using like 70-volt motors, and I can't imagine that a linear motor is going to be much more than that. So who knows?
Oh, well, I did have a few more ideas on non-gas-based flippers. None of them quite at the cutting edge as yours is. So I went down on a few different routes. And the first thing I was wondering, and I'm fairly sure this wouldn't work, is if there's a way to actually use an electric motor as part of a flipper system. Because we've seen robots like Beta producing a lot of force off of an electric motor with their hammers.
Yeah.
But of course, the advantage that a hammer has is that it's got time to accelerate before it hits. And brushless motors in particular aren't particularly torquey on startup. So just trying to use a big electric motor to lift something isn't going to give you the kind of throw you want. I am wondering if there's slight potential to almost use a hammer as a flipper and just run it upside down.
Well, that's probably the kind of thing I reckon you could do it. So if you had a direct attached motor to a flipper, I don't think you do very well. I think if you had a spiral shaped gear thing, so like we were talking about Beta's mechanism for its chain driven axe thing. It's got
the snail cam.
Exactly. It's almost a spiral thing. So it starts at one diameter, and then throughout the course of the motion, it'll get smaller. So it will start with more torque effectively, and then once it's moving, it will accelerate. And you could do the same thing with a flipper. I don't think it would be as effective as gas or some kind of other or high acceleration linear motor, but you could certainly do it. I reckon you could get an electric lifter that's much more effective than the old days.
The only reason I really looked at that at all is it is something that you can do in things like amp weights, where you've got servos that are powerful enough to throw another robot.
Yeah.
So it was an idea I went past quite quickly. What I do find very interesting is the system that Warrior Clan uses. Now, we haven't spoken about them yet, but we'll come to them. And they use a flywheel-powered flipper.
I've heard people say flywheel-powered weapons, and I cannot think for the life of me how any of these things work. So
I don't know how they do it, but what I'm envisaging is that you spin up a flywheel, and then you have some kind of clutch system that engages with it to give you a burst of power to something. I've seen it with axes. Obviously, we've seen it with the flipper as well.
yeah.
Now, obviously, that involves a lot of downsides. First of all, you're probably going to stop or slow your flywheel, so you need to get it back up to speed. And also, you're going to have some kind of clutch there that is taking a lot of punishment. But in theory, when you look at how far something like Aftershock throws an opponent when it hits with its disc, there's a lot of power potentially there if you can find a way to harness it.
I'm struggling to see the advantage, because I can't even think of a weight advantage that gives you, because the flywheels are necessarily not light things. So I feel like you're using as much weight in terms of having that thing and spinning it up and all that kind of stuff as you would as with just the pneumatic system and a gas reserve.
You're absolutely right. There's no weight saving. What you have got is a weapon that you can reuse infinitely until it breaks during a fight. So you're not going to run out of gas or end up lower on power because you've used most of your gas.
Yeah, it's interesting. I imagine that would work in a similar way to, well, one way to do it would be a similar way of having, clutch onto an axle, which has got one of those snail cam things as well that does that.
Are you going to try and find a way to just combine all of these ideas now?
Well, no, I'm just trying to think of how do you turn the energy from a flywheel into a flipping movement. So I'm just considering, this is live the way my brain works. I'm just thinking you could do the snail cammy things. You could just engage something against the flipper and whack it. Like if you had a tooth on your flywheel, right? So basically like an aftershocky type thing internally. And then just have something that can move to engage with that tooth, which is attached to the flipper. So it the tooth, the little lever thing drops down into the tooth whacks it up and sends the flipper flying. You could do that.
That something would have to be incredibly robust, though.
Yeah, that's a very brutal way of doing that, but you could do it.
Again, I'm sort of thinking about it live. I'm interested by your idea of a snail cam sort of system. I'm questioning what the point is, because one of the things that a flywheel is already going to give you is instant power. As soon as you engage with that, you've got all the power there. Whereas the issue with a brushless motor of something like a hammer is that its torque is lower when it starts up compared to when it gets going. It's better at accelerating something from fast to very fast than it is from standstill to fast. And the snail cam is a way around that.
I'm not entirely sure I agree with you. actually, given how much torque electric cars can get.
I'm talking specifically brushless motors here.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I don't know. It would be. I'm thinking a very small snail cam, just enough to get it sort of going at the beginning, and then really accelerate it. But yeah, you could do it just with straight gears if you wanted to.
I imagine there's no harm to it because having more torque when you're starting the lift isn't going to be a bad thing.
No, I mean, I feel like doing that is a slightly more gentle acceleration is going to be easier on the system, and I would think more efficient, but maybe not. I don't know.
Anyway, I have a failsafe for the third option.
Yeah.
Which is, I would love to see how much power you can get out of a spring-loaded system. Because again, in the old days of Battlebots, we saw some very good spring-powered axes. Now, they have the very obvious disadvantage of a slow recharge. But what they give you, kind of similar to what we were just talking about, is they give you that instant power when you do release them.
Yeah.
The difficulty you're going to have with it, as much as anything, is how on earth, you're going to need to sort of have a winching mechanism or whatever to bring that arm down. How on earth do you then release that?
What do you mean, like release it safely or just release it in general?
Release it in a way that A, you can then reset, and B, doesn't damage yourself.
Again, I'm asking, like, do you mean doing that safely or just as a weapon? Because you can get
as a weapon.
You can get quick release things that you just like catch something into, and they can hold an enormous amount of weight. But you just remove one tiny pin or something, and they release it instantly. So you can definitely do that, and then all you've got to do is make sure that thing is going to stay where it is, and then you just need some kind of linear actuator that just can take this pin in and out, and then you can winch it down, click it into this quick release thing, pin it in, and then that's down and firm, and then just remove this tiny pin with your thingamadoo, with your linear actuator of some description, and then you can release all that energy very quickly.
Again, that doesn't sound particularly robust. That sounds like the kind of thing that when you automate it, there's a lot of room for it to go wrong.
I mean, the people building robots are already doing very precise engineering. I don't think it's a far stretch to just use one of those and have enough precision to reset that automatically. I think you could do that.
I suppose the reason I'm doubting it is that I've only seen it done in situations where it's kind of a one-shot thing.
Yeah.
I suppose that there's no logical reason for me to think that it couldn't be done.
Well, I mean, the thing is, that's a very naive way of doing it, actually. I'm sure there are purpose-built systems that for doing this. There'll be much cleverer ways of having this kind of latching system that's completely automated, because you've got to get it down there and then have it latch so it's like mechanically held, and then have... I think that's a very easy and doable thing, to be honest, in the grand scheme of... Maybe not easy. I think it's a very doable thing in the grand scheme of things.
Fair play. I'm out of stuff now, to be honest. I kind of was before that, but I went with it anyway. How do we end this, Sam? How do we end this?
You can find the show notes for this episode at spinnerproof.com/episodes/8. And there you can find links to our iTunes page where you can give us a rating, and you can find a link to our Twitter. You can give us a follow and tweet us your feedback, your thoughts, what you had for breakfast, whatever, really. And thanks for listening.